Tonight, brothers and sisters, is a very special night because in it we remember a person who was unique in every respect. Sometimes you might look at an individual who is brave and courageous. There are many of them out there. Heroes who step in when everybody else retreats. Men and women who rise up to the occasion, rise to the occasion when everyone else flees. People who rescue others at the expense of their own safety and their own lives. That's a form of bravery. That's courage. And there's plenty of it to go around. You might find someone who is generous, who gives from their possessions, even though giving is a difficult, painful habit. It's not easy to give from that which is yours when you can enjoy it yourself. You might find someone who is truthful, who tells the truth even when it's not in their best interest, even when they know that they stand to lose, even when they know that if they speak the truth, it's going to hurt them. They speak the truth and avoid telling lies, even though lying on that occasion might be the easiest way out. It might be in their best interest. They could just lie and get away with a looming problem, with an issue that might come back and hurt them, but they say the truth nevertheless, regardless of the consequences. So you'll find people who are endowed with these character traits every once in a while. But to find someone who is the most truthful and the most courageous and the most ascetic, in other words, one who lives a life of austerity, a life of disregard to the pleasures of this world. That's what asceticism means. You disregard the pleasures of this world. You couldn't care less if someone has a better house or a better car or a better life. To you, it's all the same. To you, it's a matter of getting by. It's a matter of living your life in an honorable fashion without overindulgence. To find someone who is the very best when it comes to these character traits, all at once, all at the same time, is impossible. It's impossible. And this is the life of the individual we are here to remember tonight. Amir al-Mu'mineen وقائد الغر المحجلين يعصوب الدين إمام المتقين سيد أوصياء المرسلين أسد الله الغالب علي بن أبي طالب. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. Was a person, listen carefully, he was a man who was able, one of his achievements is that he was able to combine the best character traits that could conceivably be found within mortal human beings all at the same time. Which is why the Arab poet says, جُمِعَتْ فِي صِفَاتِكَ الْأَضْدَادُ وَلِهَذَا عَزَّتْ لَكَ الْأَنْدَادُ. You've been able to combine all these character traits, which the amazing thing is, they're often contradictory. They're antithetical. Let me give you an example. It's almost impossible someone who is incredibly brave as a warrior on the battlefield, who is undefeated when it comes to wars, when it comes to sword fights, when it comes to the most vicious confrontations with the enemy, unbeatable by any measure, his bravery, his courage unmatched and unequaled, while at the same time, when he sees a young orphan, he breaks down in tears. In other words, to be the most brave and yet the most sympathetic is impossible. Because to be brave and courageous, you have to do away with sympathy. You have to put emotions aside. You have to be almost like a robot, almost like a subhuman entity. Aspects of your humanity will have to be compromised. Elements of your emotions will have to be shut down. That's the only way you can muster up the courage and stand in the battlefield and face those tyrannical, despotic enemies of God. And yet, for the commander of the faithful to do this is the most amazing thing. Let me quote something George Jordak says. Remember, George Jordak is a Christian Lebanese poet, author, historian, a writer, who wrote about the commander of the faithful, Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi. And then, after a while, when he became famous, his book was given the award of the Book of the Year in Lebanon for several consecutive years. Imagine that. Lebanon is a country where there's a lot of intellectuals, a lot of very smart people, a lot of excellent writers and authors. It's really where a lot of Arab literature, modern Arab literature, is produced. The bulk of it happens in Lebanon for the past several decades. And yet for this person's book to be given this award year after year is truly mind-boggling. Just think about that for a moment. And this book happened to be authored by a Christian, written about a Shia Imam, about none other than Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi. So when he became famous, and I've met him personally, a very humble character, someone who is really not concerned with sectarian matters. He's concerned with only one thing, his utter infatuation with his personality that we commonly refer to as Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. After garnering fame and a respectable celebrity status, he was approached by people from other schools of thought. And they told him, well, you've written about Ali ibn Abi Talib. Well, write about Umar, write about Abu Bakr, write about Uthman, write about Muawiyah. I mean, these were historical characters who achieved a great deal. They left their mark on history. They were kings, they were rulers, they were commanders of armies, they conquered many lands, they did quite a lot. And if you're interested in these types of personalities, then we encourage you to write about them. We will cover all your expenses. So he said in response, he said, I've used my pen to write about the most pristine character in all of human history. Having finished writing my books about Ali, I then broke the pen and threw it away, because that same pen could never ever write about anyone else. Having been glorified, having been honored, having been privileged to write about Amir al-Mu'mineen, you'd want me to use my pen, my skills, my hand to write about Muawiyah, to write about this Khalifa or that Khalifa, the namesake of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Do you want me to write about these people? I broke the pen and I threw it away. Because Because that pen could never come to the level of writing about anybody else other than Ali. George Jordak says, and I quote, he says, Ali ibn Abi Talib was like an ocean. You could take the biggest mountains. Look at the incredible symbolism, the metaphors. You can tell he's a poet and a writer. He says you could take the biggest mountains on earth, throw them in this ocean, and you wouldn't see a ripple on the surface of the water. He was unshakable by any measure. Ali ibn Abi Talib couldn't be shaken by the greatest of mountains. He could face the biggest tyrants and not feel a single shiver down his spine. It was always the other way around. It was always the tyrants who feared him. He never feared anyone. No matter how big the multitudes happened to be, no matter how large the masses that faced him were, it really made no difference whatsoever to Ali's resolve, to Ali's courage. You could throw in a mountain and you wouldn't see a ripple. Not as much as a ripple. He says, yet there were things that could truly shake him at his very core. There were things that caused waves in this ocean as big as mountains. What were they? He says, if he saw a weak woman who needed help, if he saw a widow who had children to feed and no means of providing their sustenance, if Ali saw an orphan, this ocean become tumultuous with its ripples. Ali, who was unshakable to the point where he would suddenly collapse in the face of a weak human being, an oppressed individual. And history is filled with stories where Amir al-Mu'mineen could no longer contain his emotions. Filled with stories. I'll just mention one of them tonight before I move on to our next Arabic segment. One day, Amir al-Mu'mineen, one of the things he used to do was that he'd walk at the scorching heat of the burning sun of Kufa. Those of you who have been to Najaf in the summertime know exactly what I'm talking about. The heat over there right now is it's unbearable. It's unbearable. And so when you go out at midday, you literally find yourself completely alone. There's nobody else out on the streets. At midday, everyone retreats into the comfort of their homes, because there they dig up cellars and they go into those cellars which are closer to where it's a little damp, it's a little humid down there. So they go into those cellars, they grab a pillow, they get a nap, they get some sleep. And yet it was exactly at that moment when Ali ibn Abi Talib would go out in the street and he'd stand there under the scorching sun, the burning rays of that sun in Kufa, and he would just stand waiting for somebody to come by. If somebody needed any help, someone needs any assistance. One day, Ammar ibn Yasir, one of the companions, loyal companions of the Imam, is also walking outside. He spots Amir al-Mu'mineen. Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, mimma khurujuk fi hadha al-waqt. You're out here at this time, at this hour. What are you doing? So the Imam says to him, لَعَلَّ طَالِبُ حَاجَةٍ. Maybe there's someone who needs my help. I can't go and get a nap at home when I think that there might be someone out there who could use my help. The Imam says to him, well, what brought you out at this time and at this hour? He says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, it's the fact that I don't have food for my family. I haven't fed them for 3 days. The Imam said to him, well, I hadn't fed mine for 3 days either. Allahu Akbar. The Khalifa, the successor to Rasulullah, the leader of the nation. He says, my family hasn't had food for 3 days either. But here's what I'll do for you. I have a neighbor who happens to be Jewish. He respects me. He adores us as a family. I'll go and ask him for a loan. Imagine putting your reputation on the line, having to extend your hand so that you could relieve a believing brother or sister's need. But that's what Amir al-Mu'mineen, that's what distinguished him, that's what made him different. The fact that he was always available to help the needy. And so he goes to his Jewish neighbor, he asks him for a loan, he takes a little bit of money, he gives it to Ammar, he says, go feed your family. Ammar says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, what about your family? The Imam says, don't worry about my family, we have God, we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallallahu alayhi ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. So this is something that the Imam did. The story I want to mention very briefly is as such. The Imam is in the marketplace. Not for any particular reason, but to see if anybody needed help. He comes across this woman who was crying on the side of the road. And as I said, I'll say this and I'll repeat it over and over again. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of similar stories to this one. Amir al-Mu'mineen spent his entire life in servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in worship of God and servitude to His creatures. So he spots this woman, lonely, no man, no children around her. She's sitting by the side of the road and she's crying. The Imam approaches her, Ya Amatullah, alaki haja, oh servant of God, is there anything I could help you with? So she says to the Imam, she says, well, I'm a maid. I work for a family. This family sent me to go to the marketplace and buy them some dates. So I came out and I bought them the dates from the only store available. When I took it back, my master said, the Imam said, come, I'll go with you. I'll go speak to the store owner. Maybe I could convince him to exchange the dates. This is Amir al-Mu'mineen. I mean, who does this? Who does this nowadays? Let me say this parenthetically. There's a reason why the Shia have been called Rawafid. There's a reason why we are rejectors of oppression and injustice. Because we've set the bar so high. We've seen the likes of Amir al-Mu'mineen. We can never be fooled by people like Al Saud and Al Khalifa and these garbage tyrants of men. Others have no problem following them like a flock of sheep. They have no problem if they have a tyrant for a king, if they have a despot for a ruler. It doesn't matter to them. They'll follow along like a flock of sheep or camels because that's all they've seen. Look at their history. Look at their ancestry. Look at the people they've had all along. They've been exactly the same. They've been exactly the same. Model replicas of the individuals they see today. We've set the bar so high, it's literally impossible for us to follow anyone other than the infallible Imam or someone appointed by the Imam or guided by the Imam. So Amir al-Mu'mineen says to this woman, let's go, I'll speak to the store owner. He goes to him, doesn't introduce himself as Khalifatul Muslimeen. He's just a random person. You couldn't distinguish him. He's not riding in a black-tinted Mercedes with an entourage of security guards, with an escort of officials and advisors and ministers and a cabinet behind him. Has nobody except himself. He approaches the store owner. He says, Ya Abdullah, this woman came, she bought the dates from you, and now her master says, I want them exchanged. A'fiha, exchange the dates. How hard could that be? Just take this, change it for another type. The store owner didn't recognize the Imam. So he told him, go away, we're not going to exchange, it's store policy. The Imam said to him, look, she has no option. She can't even go back home. Her master says, unless you change them, you're not welcome back. Change it. So the store owner got a little angry, and in his rage, he put his hand against the Imam's chest and pushed him away. He said, اذهب اغرب عني. I told you I'm not changing it. Go away, you and this woman. As soon as he did that, other people in the marketplace who did recognize Amir al-Mu'mineen immediately flocked to this poor old store owner. أَتَعْرِفُ مَنْ هَذَا? Do you know who this is? Do you know whose chest you just put your hand on? You just pushed away Amir al-Mu'mineen. You just pushed away Khalifat Rasulullah, Ibn Amma Rasulullah, the Prophet's cousin. This is the same person who conquered Amr ibn Wadd al-Amiri. This is the one who did this to the tyrants, that to the evildoers. You're dead. You're as good as dead. Go and apologize. Seek his forgiveness. So you can imagine this person, and now what he's thinking is that I've just insulted the head of state. I've just offended the most powerful person in the world. Amir al-Mu'mineen was the ruler, he was the governor, he was the emperor of 50 of today's countries. 50. From the farthest shores of the Western Arabian Sahara and Africa, all the way to the Chechen Republic of Dagestan in the heart of Russia today. All of this was under the authority of Amir al-Mu'mineen. 50 of today's countries. The most powerful man, and you put your hand on his chest and push him away. So he literally fell to the ground, pleading for his life, begging for mercy, asking the Imam to overlook his offense and his act of defiance against Amir al-Mu'mineen. So the Imam helped him stand up again. He said to him, لا بل عفوت عنك ما كنت تصلح أمرك. I've already forgiven you. I just have one condition. Do what this woman is asking you to do. Just exchange the dates and let him go back. Allahu Akbar. This is Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is his mercy and compassion. And tonight is the night this man gets assassinated. Who would assassinate a tender soul like that of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Who would be as atrocious and as vicious and as merciless and as cold-hearted as to raise a sword and strike it on the head of the master, the Mawla Ali ibn Abi Talib? He is one that Rasulullah called Ashqa al-Akhirin yatba'u Ashqa al-Awwaleen. The most wicked man is the one who raises his hand against Ali ibn Abi Talib. The most wicked. Allahu Akbar. Tonight is the night Amir al-Mu'mineen gets struck on the head, gets assassinated. Inshallah, over the next couple of nights we'll be talking more about the Imam's character traits, about the Imam's mercy and compassion as we approach the night of his martyrdom. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.